In 1943, deep in the jungles of New Guinea, an Australian platoon vanished under circumstances never explained in official reports. The mission was routine: secure supply lines, disrupt patrols, yet what awaited them was beyond military doctrine. Survivors spoke of nights when the jungle itself fell silent, as if holding its breath for what would descend. They described shrieks from above piercing the darkness, rattling the very enamel from their teeth. Wings blotted out the moon, vast shadows sweeping low enough to tear canvas and scatter men. Rifles and machine guns roared skyward, but bullets passed into blackness, finding no enemy they could kill. One by one, soldiers were lifted screaming into the canopy, their voices cut short without a trace. By dawn, the camp lay in ruins, 5 men gone without bodies, others wounded beyond recognition. The lieutenant's final note, scrawled in his field log, read, "Only contact, not human. Platoon integrity lost." History filed it under routine casualties, but the men who returned carried another truth: the night sky above New Guinea was alive with predators no bullet could touch. Operation Cartwheel is mid-1943. An Australian platoon was ordered deep into the New Guinea interior to sever enemy supply lines and disrupt their movements. C Platoon, 31 men under a single lieutenant, formed around a heavy Bren gun, and a fragile wireless set the core of their combat strength. Most had passed through the Kanungra Jungle Training Center, drilled to crawl low, move silently, and survive where the canopy consumed the sky. Their weapons were standard Lee Enfield rifles, Bren guns, Owen submachine guns, and Mills bombs, each piece carried like an anchor through the mud. Discipline was measured in a continuous arc of fire, in watch rotations, in signals repeated until instinct replaced conscious thought. Their mission was plain: locate enemy, carrying party's ambush, and disrupt them, then vanish into the jungle before dawn. The terrain was not soil, but a lattice of waterlogged roots, a sucking mud that dictated and punished every single pace. Disease was the first enemy. Atabrine tablets and mosquito nets provided a thin shield against malaria's relentless advance. Supplies were counted with care: bully beef, hard biscuits, and batteries that weighed more than any man's morale. March order never changed: scouts ahead of the Bren gun, at the heart of the column, rearguard closing gaps at every stream. The signalers kept their codes close, each transmission stripped down to the barest, most essential words to save power. Camouflage was enforced by mud on faces and the absolute suppression of any smoke scent or shine that could give them away. Cohesion wasn't built on slogans, but in the quiet sharing of water, in a steadying hand on a man's straps. The lieutenant brought order to the chaos, forcing clarity on an unclear land with neat pencil lines and grid coordinates. The platoon sergeant measured men by their worn boots and their eyes. He trusted neither to ever lie. The younger privates carried the speed of youth, but also questions the unforgiving jungle was eager to answer. The burden of equipment and the punishing wetness punished everyone alike, indifferent to rank or prior experience. Signals spread silently through the column. A raised fist meant the platoon sank into the earth as one. No machetes were swung without cause. Paths worn by animals served better than announcing their own presence. Contact drills were pure muscle memory. The Bren first rifles bending into an arc, grenadiers closing the circle. Rain was both a gift and a sentence, drowning tracks while reducing sight to mere arm's length. The Night Watch roster was a carefully penciled document, for the dark was an enemy with an endless supply of hours. Without flares, tin and pebble alarms guarded the perimeter, securing their position with the crude certainty of noise. Illness waited in the gut and the blood in every careless lapse of proper sanitation and hygiene. Intelligence suggested only small enemy parties, targets of opportunity, rather than decisive large-scale battle. Morale was a finite resource, rationed through small luxuries like sugar and letters rarer than ammunition. Each ascent was paid for in sweat and burning lungs. Boots and breath learned the ridgeline's punishing cadence. Metal on metal was strictly forbidden. Cloth and tape muffled the sounds of war before war could begin. Local carriers offered sketches. No formal map could match crossing marks for streams and resting grounds. The first bivouac was pure geometry: low canvas roofs, rifles within arm's reach, and exits rehearsed in silence. Sentries learned to read the forest's grammar, the commas of falling leaves, the full stops of a sudden quiet. Reports meticulously logged rations, batteries, and spirits, reducing survival to a grim ledger of endurance. Ambush sites were chosen by natural constriction, where the terrain would funnel an enemy more surely than courage. Grenades and ammunition were redistributed, weight shifted to those men destined to strike first and hard. Then night descended, total, indifferent, and inevitable. met only by the simple discipline of men taught to endure it. The second night began with a familiar routine, but the dogs tethered at the edge of camp refused to settle, their bodies tense and their low growls a break in the quiet. Their hackles rose toward the tree line as if they were answering a sound the men could not hear, a low, silent frequency in the air that was beyond the human range of hearing. Local carriers whispered in hushed tones of flying shadows, their voices low, their eyes deliberately avoiding the dense canopy as though looking would bring the horror down upon them. The lieutenant, a man of facts and reason, dismissed it in his logbook, dryly recording only unsettled natives, a simple bureaucratic note that ignored the terror in their eyes. Overhead, the moon briefly revealed a sky broken by a passing shape, a dark mass that was gone in an instant before anyone could truly make it out. No aircraft were scheduled to fly this route, and no known birds of that enormous size were known to haunt these remote ridges in the interior of the jungle. A sentry reported that cloth was torn, a tent slit cleanly down its seam, without the trace of a knife's blade, as though it had been opened by sheer force. By morning, broad, deep claw marks scarred the canvas. They were much wider than a man's hand, ending in 3 distinct grooves where something had raked it open. Men joked about rats, but their strained laughter lacked all conviction, dying in the thick, humid air, a forced effort to maintain a sense of normalcy in a surreal situation. In the ration pit, tins had been disturbed, though no clear prints of any kind showed in the mud, as if the disturbance was caused by something that did not leave a physical trace. A private on watch swore he heard wings beating just above his head in the dark, a sound as heavy and powerful as sailcloth flapping in a gale. The report was filed, then quietly set aside by the lieutenant, a detail too strange for the official record to be taken seriously. That night, a lantern suddenly sputtered, guttered and died, though its fuel supply was still completely fresh, leaving them in sudden absolute darkness. In the sudden darkness, something was circling high above the bivouac, a shifting, unseen pressure in the air that they could all feel. A shadow moved across the stars, blotting out the very constellations the men had counted on for days as a familiar, comforting presence. The Bren gunner clutched his weapon tighter, his knuckles white in the dim residual light, his weapon a heavy but useless comfort. At dawn, a mule carcass was found stripped clean, its hide raked open in long, deliberate lines, its insides completely gone. Flies gathered quickly, but the smell was wrong. It was sweet and cloying, not the familiar stench of rot that they had grown accustomed to. The sergeant noted in silence that the carcass felt much lighter than it should have been, as if something had consumed the very bones within. 2 carriers deserted, leaving their packs behind without a word, a clear sign of their absolute terror at whatever they had witnessed. The platoon advanced with fewer hands, their loads redistributed among the remaining men with an unspoken and growing unease. A scout froze in his tracks, pointing at branches high above that were swaying without the slightest breath of wind, a motion that defied all logic. When rifles were raised, the branches stilled, and the forest closed around them once more, silent and watchful, hiding its secrets. That night, men woke to the unnerving sound of something scraping against the hard bark of the trees, a slow, deliberate sound. Each time a torch was flicked on, the sound instantly ceased, as if the unseen thing knew when it was being watched. When the torch died, the sound resumed, slower, more deliberate, almost a taunt in the dark. A private found his pack, torn open, contents scattered. Nothing was stolen but his valuable rations and biscuits. In the lieutenant's notes, a new unsettling phrase appeared that offered no explanation, unknown interference. At dusk, the entire jungle chorus fell silent in unison, as if cut by a single terrifying command from an unseen conductor. The unnatural silence lasted long enough to make each breath in the humid air unbearable, the quiet of pressure on their eardrums. Then far overhead, a high-pitched shriek descended sharp enough to rattle the enamel from their cups. The column halted, men staring upward into the dark, but the impenetrable canopy offered no answers, only deeper shadows. That night, sleep was shallow and broken, as if their unsettling dreams had gained a terrible weight. And when morning came, the lieutenant noted again morale unsettled. No enemy, possible aerial disturbance. The jungle closed in tighter as the platoon pressed deeper into the narrow valleys, where the light of day never seemed to linger. The humidity thickened into a suffocating weight that clung to both their skin and their steel, making every breath a struggle. The dogs, once just restless, now refused to move at all, staring upward with low guttural growls they had never made before. A sudden shadow swept across the clearing at high noon, yet no cloud marked the vast, unblemished sky above them. Men instinctively raised their rifles, but there was nothing left for them to fire upon. The shadow was gone in an instant. A private collapsed from sheer exhaustion, swearing he felt an unseen presence clutching at his shoulders, pinning him down. His comrades lifted him, but his pulse was frantic and fast, as if he had run a mile in place without ever moving. The platoon sergeant barked an order for absolute silence, but the silence was already there, heavy and unnatural. At dusk, heavy wing beats echoed over the ridgeline, measured and deliberate in their powerful rhythm. The sound rolled like canvas tearing in a gale, but it was deeper, much heavier, and filled with a cold purpose. The lieutenant logged a new entry, unidentified aerial movement recurring after dark with a trembling hand. A forward scout vanished without a sound. His rifle was found lodged upright in the mud, its sling torn away. The search party found no blood, no tracks, only a handful of disturbed leaves spiraling down from above. Anxiety spread through the ranks faster than malaria. Every man scanned the canopy instead of the trail. Sentries began firing wildly at shifting shadows, the impenetrable jungle answering only with echoes alone. One long burst of Bren fire cut through the night silence. But the silence instantly reclaimed it, heavier than before. The stench of guano mixed with iron drifted into camp, an acrid choking odor that burned their lungs. A private gagged, whispering that it smelled like something that was both alive and rotting at the very same time. The lieutenant crossed out the entry in his log, then rewrote it in harsher, more forceful strokes. Rations disappeared again, the tins shredded as if pierced by powerful, impossibly sharp talons. The platoon fashioned makeshift alarms from wire and tin cups, but they rattled uselessly each hour. In the half-light before dawn, a sentry screamed, then fell utterly silent, his cry cut short mid-sentence. His body was found hanging from a tree limb high above his heavy harness, straps slashed cleanly open. His eyes stared upward, frozen in a mask of terror, his face locked in absolute fear. Panic rippled through the ranks, only held in check by the sheer force of the sergeant's barked orders. Men doubled the perimeter, their rifles fixed outward, though nothing was approaching on the ground. Above them, the canopy swayed without wind, as if something vast moved through unseen corridors. The Bren gun was repositioned skyward, its heavy barrel aimed directly into the solid darkness above. Each burst of tracer lit only emptiness, the bullets instantly swallowed by the black leaves. At nightfall, a terrifying chorus of high-pitched shrieks erupted overhead, neither bird nor machine. The platoon fired blindly into the dark, the jungle erupting with flashes like lightning caged. In the chaos, two men were lifted, screaming from the ground, their cries cut short midair. Rifles clattered uselessly to the ground as the bodies vanished into the canopy above them. The sergeant fired upward until his magazine emptied, his hands shaking uncontrollably. A heavy, unnatural silence followed, broken only by the sound of their labored, frantic breathing. When dawn came, the survivors found torn webbing and helmets that had been crushed like paper. No blood trailed it away, only drag marks that ended abruptly at the base of the trees. Collins, the youngest private, sketched frantic wings in his notebook, the strokes jagged with fear. He whispered the word bats, though no one else dared to repeat it aloud. A carrier muttered of evil spirits, then fled before the platoon could physically restrain him. The lieutenant's log grew terse: enemy, not of human origin. Casualties unaccounted. Radio static drowned every call, the wireless reduced to a useless hiss without a signal. The platoon stood isolated and cut from command, facing something unnamed and terrible. The men's eyes no longer watched the ground for ambush, but the sky for predation. And as the third night fell, the canopy trembled again, promising another descent. Night fell under a swollen moon, and the platoon braced for what they knew would come. They stood ready for the terrible unseen descent. The jungle air grew unnaturally still. Each ragged breath was loud enough to betray a man's position to something in the darkness. Men gripped their rifles until their hands shook with tension, more than the cold and exhaustion that plagued them. The first shriek cut across the valley, a sound that was long and piercing like the tearing of metal. Above, massive wings blotted out the stars descending as shadows given a monstrous solid form. The Bren gun spat upward, tracers carving orange ladders into the impenetrable blackness of the night sky. One silhouette reeled in the light of the tracers, but it did not fall. It circled higher, shrieking with unholy fury. The canopy above them exploded as huge branches cracked and rained down onto the desperate men below. A private was lifted, screaming from his feet, his body vanishing just beyond the treetops and out of sight. His cry ended with a sickening, absolute silence that no one dared to break, a pause that felt eternal. Grenades arced upward, their bursts of light flashing monstrous outlines on the canopy. Another man was struck down instantly, his chest torn open as if by a massive razor-sharp claw. Panic shattered all formation. rifles fired in every direction without any aim or sense of purpose. The lieutenant shouted orders, but his words were completely drowned beneath the utter chaos and screams. The sergeant tried to rally a section only to be knocked aside by a falling broken body. Screams multiplied, some human, some inhuman, tangled together in a merciless symphony. One horrifying figure descended close enough to reveal leathery skin stretched taut across its visible ribs. Its teeth gleamed as it raked a man's shoulder, dragging him into the absolute darkness above. Lanterns were overturned in the chaos. The camp burned with flickering patches of desperate light. In the smoke and fire shapes darted through the flames, their powerful wings hammering the air with hurricane force. Men fired until their rifles clicked, empty, desperately reloading, with shaking, fumbling hands. The carrier stumbled and then vanished into the dark tree line, never to be seen or heard from again. The platoon collapsed into fragmented, isolated groups, fighting not as soldiers, but as hunted men. Collins clutched his notebook even as he scrambled, recording frantic lines in charcoal. He wrote the words larger than any bird, his script jagged and uneven from the fear. Above him, the moon vanished completely behind a solid black swarm of wings. For one terrifying moment, the night itself seemed to descend upon them, a living entity. The Bren team fired belt after belt, the barrel glowing a deep, angry red. Their fire cut through one beast, its broken body crashing down in a broken, silent heap. When men approached, the corpse had already vanished, dragged into the trees. Fear turned to a deeper dread. This enemy could not be killed, only endured. Ammunition dwindled quickly. Pockets once heavy with clips now rattled hollow and uselessly. The lieutenant gave the final order to break camp, to retreat into the riverline. Men stumbled through the sucking mud and twisted roots, firing blindly behind them. The jungle echoed with wings and shrieks, a constant, merciless pursuit from the air. One by one, men disappeared from the column, swallowed by the darkness above them. Collins would later describe the night not as a battle, but simply as a harvest. By dawn, the survivors were scattered, bloodied, and broken, their cohesion completely erased. As the sun rose weakly, the lieutenant marked the final words in his log: contact beyond comprehension. Platoon integrity lost. At first light, the battlefield resembled not a camp, but a ruin-torn canvas, scattered gear, and silence deeper than any jungle dawn. Where neat rows of shelters once stood, only broken frames remained sagging into mud, as if crushed by unseen weight. Helmets and webbing lay abandoned in disarray, some marked with deep gouges that no blade could have carved. Survivors gathered in a trembling circle, counting heads, the grim tally falling short again and again. 5 men were missing entirely, their names now spoken only in whispers, each absence heavier than the mud underfoot. 7 more were bandaged hastily, blood seeping through cloth, their groans the only human sound left. The lieutenant, his hands steady by habit but shaking in truth, inscribed the numbers into his field log. No bodies were found, for the missing only shredded harness straps and stains where men had once stood. The Bren gun centerpiece of their defense rested silent, its barrel warped and blackened from desperate, ceaseless fire. Rations lay scattered across the ground, tins punctured and torn open by marks too wide, too jagged to be made by knives. The platoon sergeant paced the perimeter without a word, every step heavy, his expression locked between duty and disbelief. Collins sat apart from the others, hunched over his notebook, sketching wings and eyes with frantic strokes of charcoal. His pages bore shapes monstrous and uneven images that men avoided, though none could deny what they had seen. In the margins of his notes, he wrote, "They hunt in silence and they do not leave the dead." The radio hissed with unbroken static, no message and no message, out the lifeline to command severed. Each failed call deepened the isolation, as if the air itself refused to carry their voices. At the camp's edge lay a mule, carcass ribs torn wide, its eyes glassy, its body curiously drained of blood. The stench of iron and guano hung over the site, clinging to skin and clothing, as though absorbed into flesh. Survivors whispered that the night had not been an attack but a harvest, and they were prey chosen without mercy. Some men prayed aloud for the first time since enlistment, others stared blankly at the canopy with hollow eyes. The lieutenant wrote in private notes, "Never meant for command, enemy, not Japanese. Enemy not of Earth." A private packed his gear in mechanical silence, moving as if already absent from the world around him. Weapons were disassembled, cleaned and reassembled, but the motions were hollow, no conviction behind them. The wounded lay in rose bandages stained dark, their moans mingling with the drone of insects returning to the silence. Native carriers refused to come near the camp, their footprints vanishing into the jungle long before dawn. Every sound from above creaks, rustles, even bird calls snapped eyes upward, fear etched into every face. Ambushes and objectives were forgotten. Now the platoon spoke only of surviving another night. The sergeant ordered silence at parade ground volume, but his command was unnecessary. The silence had already claimed them. As dusk approached, Guinea's shadow stretched long, and the men felt the weight of night not as time but as a sentence. The lieutenant closed his log with a final note: platoon fractured, contact unconfirmed, morale broken beyond repair, awaiting night with dread. The official report, submitted weeks later, reduced the entire ordeal to a single sentence: casualties sustained during night operations in hostile terrain. Any mention of aerial-shaped shrieks or unexplained losses was struck through in red ink sealed beneath layers of bureaucracy. Yet among the men who survived silence, held heavier than words, each one carrying unspoken knowledge of what had truly occurred. Local carriers refused to set foot in that valley, whispering of spirits that ruled the canopy and punished trespassers. The lieutenant wrote in his private notes, never intended for command: "We were engaged by a predator not found in manuals nor known to nature." The sergeant, hardened by years of service, confessed in rare moments that the enemy had not fought them, but harvested them. Collins clung to his notebook, its pages stained with sweat and rain filled with frantic drawings of wings wider than tents and eyes like burning coals. In the margins he wrote, "They come from above, swift and silent. A man can be gone before his breath is finished." The radio, once the platoon's lifeline, remained nothing but a channel of static, as though the air itself rejected human voices. Survivors recalled how the jungle seemed complicit, offering no animal sounds, no insect chorus, only the drumming of unseen wings. Some swore that on the march out, shadows tracked them from the treetops, never striking, but never allowing them to forget. At dusk, the men claimed to hear faint shrieks carried by the wind high above, beyond sight, mocking and eternal. Ammunition counted at base showed belts fired far beyond what reports acknowledged, suggesting panic no officer dared admit. The Bren team, once proud, left their gun behind its warped barrel, a monument to futility. The lieutenant's journal ended with the phrase, "Not Japanese, not human, still out there." Soldiers avoided speaking of New Guinea after the war, their medals unpolished, their memories sealed like wounds. One man years later whispered that he still woke at night to the sound of wings outside his window, though he lived far inland. Another never entered a forest again, choosing instead the open plains where no canopy could hide the sky. Historians reviewing the campaign noted the odd gap in patrol records, the sudden loss of an entire platoon's strength with little explanation. Some speculated about clerical errors, others about ambushes too embarrassing to record honestly. But among the faded papers, one margin note remained uncensored: casualties due to aerial disturbance, unknown species. Command struck through the words with black ink, but the trace lingered like a scar on the document. The jungle itself reclaimed the battlefield, covering broken helmets, torn canvas, and unmarked graves beneath vines and silence. Local villagers continued to tell stories of great bats that fed on men passing the tail as warning to children. To outsiders, it was dismissed as myth, a superstition born of war and fear. Yet the survivors carried scars not found on their bodies, but etched in their eyes whenever the subject was raised. They had faced an enemy that could not be fought with bullets, one that came not to conquer, but to consume. And in every silence after dark, they remembered the way the forest hushed before the wings descended. History recorded their battle as another small note in the grand campaign, a footnote overshadowed by larger victories. But in the haunted spaces between official lines, their truth endured, that the sky itself had turned against them, and that somewhere above the jungle, the wings still waited.